First story is titled, Update. Am I the a-hole for not agreeing to a paternity test unless my husband goes to therapy? Original post. I, 28 female, and my husband, 32 male, have a 3-year-old son together. There has never been any doubt that my husband is the father. I've never given him any cause for concern that I cheated on him. He acknowledges all of this. Last week, he came to me and said that for the last few months, he has been plagued, his word, with this anxiety that our son is not his. They don't look identical, granted, but they definitely share similar features, and I see my husband whenever I look at my son. I was obviously blindsided by this. I had no idea who was having these thoughts. I asked him to explain why he thought that he wasn't his, and he couldn't really provide any answer other than a gut feeling. He asked me if I would be okay if he got a paternity test done so it could ease his mind. I initially said absolutely not. No way in hell. I was very, very offended. He told me that he could just do it without my permission, and I said if he did that, I would never forgive him. My husband does not have a history of anxiety, but he did lose his job back at the start of the pandemic, so he's been with our son most of the time while I work my full-time job from home. I know this hasn't been easy on him. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, but maybe he is starting to resent our son or something from just having to be around him constantly. After our heated conversation, I spoke with some friends about it, and they said that he was probably having psychiatric problems due to the stress of not having a job. I came back to my husband and said that if he went to therapy and maybe started taking some anti-anxiety meds, that I would consider getting the test. He was very upset at this and said that once he got the results of the test back, he wouldn't be anxious anymore, and that I wasn't being fair by making him go through a whole rigmarole, again his word, just to get peace of mind, which was a phrase he used a lot during this time. He again threatened to just get the test without my permission and said this would effectively end our relationship. I think there's something more serious going on here, and I thought that my solution here is as fair as I'm willing to be. My friends are divided. Some think I should just take the test, and others are saying he's being insane and that if I cave to this, there's just going to be something else. I need some neutral perspective here. Am I the a-hole? Top comments before we read the updates. Not the a-hole, even in the best case scenario, where this is all due to anxiety brought on by the pandemic. Don't believe that after the test, he'll be better. Soon it'll be 2 tests, then 3 because he'll be afraid of false positives. This type of anxiety gets worse until it moves on to something else. I've had the same obsessive anxiety for years, and it didn't get better until after therapy and medication. I still struggle. Stand your ground, OP. This is the exact problem. I have generalized anxiety disorder. The thing about anxiety is that it cares very little about things like truth or reality or proof. Just knowing intellectually that you're being ridiculous has never stopped an intrusive thought from coming back. If she got the test, OP's husband might feel better for a day or week or 2. But after that, his brain will either go back to the same worry, test results be damned, or find a new one to latch onto. OP, right now your refusal is probably feeding his anxiety. She has something to hide. So I'm not going to recommend that you hold firm to him getting treatment first. But I would hold out until he makes a concrete steps toward getting treated, such as making doctor's appointment. And if he cancels afterwards, because I'm fine now, then draw the line there, and definitely refuse the next ridiculous anxiety request. Because it will be coming. OP, I'm so sorry for saying this, but according to my psychology professor, if your partner is obsessively worrying about you cheating on them, they are likely to be cheating on you. Guilt projection. I've heard that too. It's also my understanding that consistent and irrational fear of cheating is associated with borderline personality disorder, which of course means the medication and therapy would be the best course of action. Edit to add, my apologies that this sounded like I was trying to diagnose him. This situation is definitely not enough to warrant this, and I am not a professional. I only suggested the idea as something that could be worth looking into, if it does seem to be a psychological issue as OP suspects, and to agree that therapy would be helpful, because it easily could be related to his mental health. Not the a-hole, OP. Your suggestions will all benefit him. You're not putting him through anything. You're trying to help him. I appreciate this, but I'm very certain that he's not cheating on me. Not the a-hole. That is offensive to you and to your child. If my husband did that to me, I would have told him the same thing. You do this behind my back, it's a deal breaker. Adios, a-hole. Edit. I haven't read all the comments here because the amount of responses has been overwhelming. However, I want to say that I really do not appreciate strangers attempting to diagnose my husband over the internet. It is disgustingly presumptuous. I'm his wife, and I don't feel qualified to do that, which is exactly why I want to go to a licensed therapist. Another thing I'm seeing pop up is that I'm somehow demanding that he take medication. I said maybe medication, meaning that I only think he should be on medication if a licensed therapist prescribes them to him. I don't want to shove pills down his throat, which seems to be what some people think I want to do. As for the numerous suggestions of marriage counseling as opposed to individual therapy, I think this is a great idea. I didn't initially consider it because I was so focused on it being his problem, but we are ultimately a team. And I'll suggest that to him today. Hopefully it goes better. Thanks everyone for your input. Now for the update. Thanks to everyone who commented on my original post. Unfortunately, this is not a great update. If you don't want to read it all, the bottom line is, we're heading toward divorce. I took some of the commenters' advice to go to couples therapy, which we did the same week as my first post. I had to push him a bit to get him to agree to the therapy, but I told him it was either this or I would never give in to the test. The first Zoom session was a little awkward, since neither of us had ever done therapy before. After listening to both of us, she basically said that she thought we should do the test to see if that eases his anxiety, and that if it doesn't, which at the time was my concern, that we could go from there. So, my husband was thrilled, and I agreed, but I wanted to be on Zoom with the therapist when we received the results, so we could talk it out with her there, which she was fine with. So, we did the test, and we did our Zoom session when our results were in. And surprise, surprise, the paternity test says he's 99% likely to be the father. He didn't appear relieved or happy or anything of what I expected. Maybe this was unfair, but I did expect him to cry and maybe apologize to me for his lack of trust. This wasn't just my imagination though, because when the therapist asked him in our first session how he would feel if the test came back saying he was the father, he said he would feel relieved, but he was angry. He kept saying that it was over and that he didn't want to talk about it. He kept repeating it's done over and over when the therapist would try to ask a question about how he was feeling. And he was obviously not listening when I tried to talk about my feelings. And when I told him I wanted to talk about it, he yelled at me, which he never does. What else is there to freaking talk about? I was mortified that he was talking to me this way in front of a therapist, and she said she would schedule a new session once he had time to process. After the session, he wouldn't look at me or speak to me. That he was so upset that he was our wonderful son's father made me absolutely lose my mind. We screamed at each other, and it ended with me saying that I can't do this anymore. He's at his brother's apartment now, finally away from our son, which is obviously what he wanted all along, and my mom is now staying in my place to help me out around the house. I texted him this weekend, asking if he wanted to do another therapy session, and he asked if I really thought that would help, and I had to admit that didn't. The speed at which this whole thing happened, just a month ago, I would have said we have a happy marriage, is still completely shocking to me. But I don't see us recovering from this. This felt cathartic to type out though, so thanks, I guess. Now for the closing comments. I'm sorry it turned out like this. I have a feeling he has some deeper issue, and he was never going to accept any answer other than he's not the father, because he's got it in his head now. I hope he gets the help he needs, and I hope you find peace in your future. I think he wanted their son to not be his son, so he would be justified to leave Opie. It sounds like that's what he wanted and needed an excuse to end things. Opie, I hope you get sole custody. Your soon-to-be ex is a gargantuan a-hole, and your kids will be better off not having him in their lives. Please get them and yourself into therapy. You all need it. I think he already wanted to end the marriage for whatever reason, and the paternity thing was just a ruse. He probably figured either you'd be so outraged that it could send you two into a downward spiral, in which you'd look like the bad guy for refusing to do the test, or maybe there was some chance he wasn't the father, and he could then feel righteous in his reasoning for leaving you. Now, he's acting like such an a-hole that you want to leave him. So, I think he wants your marriage to end but doesn't have the spine to do it properly. I thought this too, that he just wanted out of the marriage and was looking for a way out. But if he suddenly announced he didn't want to be with me anymore, I would be shocked and hurt obviously, but it would be better than it is now. Now, he's basically announced that he's done with being a father, which after being a loving and devoted dad of 3+ years, is just completely crazy to me. I thought that, if we were ever going to split up, we'd at least co-parent peacefully. This is just so unfair to our boy, and my heart is breaking for him. Geesh, he sounds terrible. I can't imagine what a shock it must be for you, and your son is going to have a hard time understanding. Maybe it's some kind of midlife crisis, who knows. It doesn't really matter why he's doing this. Just make sure you document everything and get a lawyer ASAP. Also, when he first told me that he wanted a test, he said that he wanted my approval to do it. I said no and told him that if he did it behind my back, I would leave him, and he listened. He didn't betray me like that and told me that he didn't want a divorce, just a test. So why all of a sudden would that change based on results that should have made him happy? I just can't explain it. Now for the last story. Am I the a-hole for throwing my biological daughter out of my house after she accused me of abandoning her? Me and my ex-girlfriend were together for barely 1 year before we broke up. She came into my life 8 years after we broke up, suing me for child support for a 7-year-old girl, Anne. After proving paternity, I tried to sue for custody. We were in different states, and courts rules entirely in her favor. I got visitation every 2 months. In reality, I hardly got to see her once/twice a year. Edit. I tried to visit more, but my ex didn't let me. Went to court. Nothing happened. When Anne was 10, my ex asked me to give up my parental rights. I refused. Then, the game started. She would arrange visits last minute so that I cannot afford the tickets, and cancel plans last minute so that I would lose money. She kept this up, and I broke and gave up my rights. Anne too had a father figure, and pretty soon, the calls stopped too. When Anne was 10, they moved to another country. I did not talk to them after that. Now, I am married and have 2 very beautiful stepchildren, whom I love very much. Anne is now 19, and she reached out to me. She was in the state and wanted to visit. I invited her to my house. My family was at my wife's place. I haven't even said hello before she started ranting at me. She told me about how I was a deadbeat father, and she hated her mom and stepdad, and how I abandoned her, etc. I asked her what she was talking about. Turns out, ex and stepfather were really crazy and made her life miserable. She is now in no contact with them. She talked about how I abandoned her, and there was no responsible adult who even cared about her a little bit. At this point, I told her that it wasn't my fault, that her mom didn't tell me/pressured me into giving up custody. I guess Anne didn't know that. I explained everything. Even after I explained everything, she continued to yell at me about how I should have done something. I calmly asked her what I should have done. She became more angry and yelled more as she didn't have an answer. I calmly told her that I have always wanted a relationship with her, and I was so glad when she called, but it's very obvious that she is only here to place blame and I wanted her to leave. She said that wasn't fair, and she only came here to know me. I calmly pointed out that she was here for 2 hours, and she hasn't asked a single thing about me and only yelled. In the end, she stormed out. I am still open to having a relationship with her, but I'm not willing to be anyone's punching bag. Am I the a-hole? Now for the top comments. Not the a-hole, but you have to realize your ex told her lies about you her whole life. Let her process what you told her, and if/when she reaches out again, try not to hold this against her. I really don't see how the kid is the a-hole either. I don't blame her at all for how she reacted. That's 19 years of bottled up emotions finally surfacing. You're exactly right that she needs to cool off and process everything, and Opie needs to keep a line of communication open for when she's ready. But I think no a-holes here is a more accurate judgment. The only a-holes involved are the mother and stepdad, but they're not relevant to the judgment. She's pretty much an adult, and should understand that yelling at someone for 2 straight hours without trying to understand someone else's side doesn't help anything, regardless of what she's been told her entire life. You're the a-hole. She's 19 and has been brainwashed and felt abandoned her entire life. You are an adult, giving her entirely new information and couldn't deal with her misguided emotions for 2 seconds and threw her out. Wait to confirm everything she was ever told about you, and to be the latest adult that utterly failed her. Right? And it's not just anger, it's grief. She was standing in Opie's house, grieving the better life she could have had and deserved. Opie got a happy little family, and his daughter got a life of trauma. Not the a-hole. For your latest action, not allowing yourself to be abused is a pretty basic boundary, but I think you can be more empathetic to her hurt and blame. You should be willing to listen to her feelings, even if they're negative about you, but you shouldn't have put up with being yelled at for hours. I'd reach out again, express your desire to connect, but stick to the no telling at each other boundary. Don't tell her she's wrong for being hurt and blaming you. The boundary should just be the yelling, and read up on empathetic listening. Oh man. So, my bio dad signed away his rights to my dad when I was 4. I had 2 great parents and was still angry at bio dad for giving me up. Even after I heard his side of the story, I was still angry. If you want a relationship with her, you need to take the yelling for a bit. She is angry. You can't fix it if you don't allow her to get that anger out. So, you're the a-hole. I strongly suggest family counseling for the 2 of you. And that's the end of this video, folks. As always, leave a comment and hit like and subscribe. And if you want more of this content, turn your notification on to get updated on the latest videos. And I'll catch you in the next one. Stay safe.